Hello everyone, welcome to part 1 of this full stack Flutter development series where we'll be looking at creating a food ordering application. In this video, we'll be looking at our authentication module. Our intention in this project is to create the application in a modular fashion using Flutter packages or Flutter libraries. So here we have a simple architectural overview of what the authentication module will look like. And this architecture does not necessarily translate to all the other modules. So as we create the other modules, we will architect based on what is best for that particular module. We are taking a modular approach where we'll be creating isolated modules that are testable, that are loosely coupled, and that are easily maintained and can be transferred from this application to another. So when we finish with this authentication module, we should be able to use it or reuse it in any other of our Flutter applications that requires authentication with minimum modification. So it is always good to have a simple design as to guide how you will go about structuring your application, and in this case structuring our authentication module. If you have been following my domain-driven design series, then you will see some concepts here that are similar. This, however, is not about domain-driven design, and if you know about clean architecture, you might see some concepts that are similar. But the intention is to create a module that is loosely coupled and where there is no dependence on third-party library or external frameworks. So the dependencies are inverted so that our business logic, or those objects we consider to be important to our business rules, those objects are free of third-party libraries. And so, as you can see, we have a domain layer where we'll be using objects as a credential and also a token. We'll be using token-based authentication. And we'll have an auth service abstraction that will be implemented by those adapters in the infrastructure part of the system. This is where all the third-party libraries lie and all the implementation details. We have our use cases, which will represent our business rules or our application logic in this area, and we have our API or auth API, which will represent those endpoints that we need to call in order to authenticate our users to the back end. So this is a simple architectural overview of what we will be doing. So let us now go into Visual Studio Code and see how we will implement this. So now we are in Visual Studio Code where we have created our food ordering application. Now, to make our project more readable, in the sense that to get rid of all these folders that kind of clutter up the area, what we're going to do, we are going to use this extension called Make Hidden. So there's an extension called Make Hidden, and you're going to install that extension. And so When that extension is installed, we can then select folders individually and say hide, and then that will hide the folder and so clear up our workspace. So I'm just going to go ahead and hide all the unnecessary files. So I have hidden all the unnecessary files, and the only folder, or the only two folders necessary right now is the lib folder and our test folder and our pubspec YAML file. So now we're going to create our authentication or auth module using the Flutter module or the Flutter package command. So I'm going to say Flutter create, and I'm going to say template. The template is a package, and I'm going to name it auth. So now that should create our auth module. So now we have our auth module here. I am going to go inside, and as you can see, it generates its own test folder, its own pubspec YAML, where all those third-party libraries or packages that we use will be isolated and contained within this auth package, separate from our main application lib folder, where all our widgets and UI stuff will be. So now again, I'm going to use the make hidden tool extension and hide all the unnecessary files here. Okay, so now our workspace looks much better. So inside our lib folder, I am going to create a source folder, which all our application source for auth module will reside. And I'm going to go ahead and create those domain models and those domain abstraction. So the first module I'm going to create is the credential model, domain model. So I'm going to say create a class, call it credential, and then I'm going to say I want for the credential name, email, password. So now quickly create a constructor. And I'm going to make the email and password, well, the email a required field. So I also want to add to this an authentication type, so I can know if the user was authenticated using email, or the user was authenticated using Google or Facebook or some other form of authentication. So I'll create an enum and I'll call it auth type. And for now, I'm only working with two types, email and Google. And I'm going to add that to, call it type, to my credential. And I'm going to make it a required field inside the the constructor. So there we have our credential domain model. The next model I'll create will be the token that will be returned when the user is authenticated, since we'll be doing token-based authentication. So for token, it will be a simple class that will hold a value string, the value of the token, and I'm going to say constructor is that value. So that's our token. Next, we're gonna create our abstraction. So we'll create now our, inside the domain, the auth service abstraction or interface. So I'll call it auth service contract. Create an abstract class iAuth service, and I'm going to return a future token whenever the person signs in. And for sign out, future void for sign out. Sign out. So just import our token class. Token. So here, instead of returning a token, I am going to return a result type from the async package, the async dart package. So what this does is that it allows us to return a result which is either a value result or an error result. So when the user signs in, then I'll return a result with a token, or if there is an error, I'll return an error result. So this is our abstraction for auth service. I'll also create an abstraction for our sign up service, since we did not want to put sign up in this, because it therefore means that whenever we implement, for example, Google or Facebook, which doesn't have a sign up option, since sign up is strictly reserved for email, then if we should put it here, then we would have a function in those implementations that is without purpose. So instead of doing that, we here follow the interface segregation principle and just create an interface for sign up with the necessary method. So I'll say sign up service. Abstract class I sign up service. And then now we'll have our sign up method, which again will return a future result with a token. sign up. So we'll import those. For some reason, auto import doesn't work well whenever we create these Flutter libraries or package. So I'm going to say async token so I'm going to import async package, and then for my sign up I want the name, the email, and the password. So there is my sign up service abstraction. Now these objects are what constitute my domain in this auth module. So next I'll create a folder and I'll call it use cases. And inside my use cases, I am going to create a sign in use case. Class sign in use case. And this sign in use case will use the auth service to sign in. So I have the iAuth service. I'm gonna make this path relative. So sign in use case auth service. And I'm gonna create a single method which again return a result with the token. And I'm gonna say execute. And this method will execute the auth service that is passed, or the sign in method on that particular auth service. Import from the async package. So there we have our sign in use case. Now we'll create our sign up use case. Sign up use case. I'm just gonna copy and paste the sign in and then change out a few things. I sign up service, sign up service, sign up service, sign up. Here I'm gonna accept the required parameters. So I'm gonna say name, email, and password. just pass them to the sign up service. Let's import our token. And also the async result package. Side of our sign up service, sign up. So now that is our sign up use case. So now we'll create a folder, create another folder where we'll implement the different auth service. So I'm going to create another folder. I'm going to call it infra. And on the infra, I'm going to have adapters. This is where I will create the email auth and the Google auth. I'm going to create a file, email auth, class email auth, and this email auth is going to implement iAuth service and also the sign up service. Create those methods, and the email auth for its dependencies, I'm gonna create a iAuth API, and this the email auth will use as dependency to call the necessary endpoint using the API. So now this doesn't exist. So I'm gonna create it inside the infrastructure. I'm gonna create another folder and I'm gonna call it API. And then on the API, I'm gonna create the auth API contract. So abstract class iAuth API, and it's gonna have a sign in method and a sign up method. So again, future, I'm gonna return a result string, which will be the token string from the back end. Sign in. This is gonna accept a credential. And the sign up is basically the same. So I'm just gonna copy, paste, sign up. And for the result, I'll import the async library. So there we have our iAuth API abstraction. Now if we'll import it here, I want to make these relative. So now we have our API, and now we can create the credential that will be passed. So we have the credential, and then whenever the user says sign in, I want to ensure that the credentials are added. So I'm going to say assert that credential is not null. And then I'm going to call the API endpoint, the sign in endpoint, pass it the credential, and then I'm gonna check if the result is error, then I'm going to return the result as error. So I'm going to return the result as error. Otherwise, I'm going to return a result, a value, which should be a token. And I'm going to create a token from the token string that was returned. So we have our sign in email auth method. For sign up, it's pretty similar. For our sign up, we're going to say we're going to create a credential I'm going to say the auth type or did I name type with the auth type email name and the password. So we create a credential, and then we're gonna call the API endpoint. Sign up, and we're gonna pass in that credential. And again, if the result is error, then we return the result as error. Otherwise, we'll just return a token, create a new result with a token from the return token string as value and get the actual value. So we're gonna create another method, a public method rather, and I'm going to call it credential. This method will be used to create the credential necessary for sign in, so that when we assert, it is not null. So for our sign in, the only thing we need would be email and password. So I'm going to say email, password, and these are required fields. So now credential equal create a new credential. I'm gonna say the type is auth type, email, and password. There will be no name passed here. So there is our credential for signing in. So now we have our email auth set up, and we'll now quickly set up our Google auth. So inside of our adapters, we'll create another file, and we're going to call it Google auth. Google auth, and this implements our iAuth service. So we are going to go into our pubspec YAML file. Just going to rename this authentication module, and I'm going to use pubspec assist and look for Google. I'm going to get Google sign in. So now Google sign in is installed. I can go to my Google auth, and I need the API also. So the iAuth API, and I need Google sign in, and also the Google sign in account. Current, I'm gonna call it current user. Now inside of our constructor, I'm going to inject the API, and I am going to create a default Google sign in value. So I'm going to inject Google sign in instance by default in the constructor. So, and you might wonder why I'm doing this. The reason why I'm doing this is that for testing purpose, I can inject a mock Google sign in, but for production, then it will use the default value and just create a new Google sign-in instance. So I'm going to say this Google sign-in equal Google sign-in, which is the one that I'm injecting. Otherwise, two question sign means if it is null. So if no value was passed, then I create a Google sign-in instance, passing the scopes of I want email and I want profile. Need to get rid of these. So there we go. Now for our sign-in method, I am going to create a private method called handle Google sign-in. So first I'm going to say await handle Google sign-in. I'm going to create that method here. Where this method within a try catch block will call the Google sign-in method. So from the instance of the Google sign-in object, I'll call sign-in, and then if there's an error, I'm just gonna return. So it will handle the sign-in and say if the current user equal null, means Google sign-in failed, then return a result, but an error result with failed to sign in with Google. If the sign-in was successful and we got back a user, then I'm going to create a credential from that user. So credential, I'm going to say the type is auth type Google. The email would be the current user email, and the name would be the current user display name. Now there wouldn't be a password for this one. And so now I'm going to pass that user to the API to create the user on the backend and return a token. So auth API sign in pass a credential. I'm gonna say again if there was an error. So if is error, then return the error. Result as error. Otherwise, return the result value, which will be a token from the return token string from the API value. So create the token. Now return it in the result. For sign out is fairly simple for Google. Sign out is just to use the Google instance and disconnect it. However, there might be some API endpoint that we must call in the future to invalidate the token, but we'll look at that further down the line. So now we have our Google sign in. So for adapters, we have two sign-in service. We have the email and the Google. And for any other service that we wish to implement, we would follow the same structure. Now again, I want these to be relative. It should be async. Here we go. So I'm going to stop here for now, and in the next video we'll continue to look at completing our auth module. We'll be writing a few tests, and we'll also looking at implementing our auth API. So if you like the video, if you like what you see so far, please like, subscribe, share the video, and the code will be on GitHub, so you can get it from there and follow along. So see you guys in the next one. Thank you.